Death was coming. It had a name, and it was hungry. The storm stretched across the horizon like a giant's shadow, dark and terrible. They called it the Veil, a roaring, sickly green monster that ate everything in its path. Zane had been watching it grow bigger and bigger for hours now, his eyes squinting against the dying light of day. The storm looked like a bruise on the sky, ugly and spreading. He'd seen storms before, but this one was different. This one wanted blood. Zane knew better than to be caught outside when the veil hit. The rain it carried wasn't normal rain, it was acid, strong enough to eat through metal if you gave it enough time. That's why Vega 9 looked like a graveyard now. Twisted metal everywhere, bones scattered in the dirt, and silence that made your ears ring. This planet had been different once. People had lived here, worked here, dreamed here. Vega 9 had been a real colony world, full of hope and promise. Families had walked these streets. Children had played in the parks. Now it was just a rusted shell where only the desperate and the damned dared to stay. Zane wasn't sure which one he was anymore. Maybe both. He pulled his hood down lower, the rough fabric scratching against his neck. The strap of his satchel dug into his shoulder, heavy with the day's finds. He'd been out scavenging since dawn, picking through the bones of an old supply depot like a vulture. The work was dirty, dangerous, but it was life. His haul wasn't much, a few rations that might still be good, a half-dead energy cell, some scrap metal that might fetch a few credits back at the outpost. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But it would keep him alive another day, and that's all that mattered now. The wind picked up as he moved through the wreckage, howling through the jagged metal ruins like a wounded animal. The sound made his skin crawl. He'd heard that sound before, right before everything went to hell. The first drops of rain began to fall. They hit the ground and sizzled, eating into the dirt like tiny bites. Time to move. Time to run. He turned toward his bunker, his so-called home, when something caught his eye. A shape, barely visible through the thick grey mist that rolled ahead of the storm. It was slumped against the twisted remains of a crashed transport. Dark and still at first. Zane thought it was another corpse. Vega 9 was full of them, skeletons. Of people who had gambled on this planet and lost everything. People who had come here looking for a new start and found only death. But then it moved. Zane stopped walking. His heart skipped a beat. The figure shifted slightly, trembling, barely holding itself upright. A gust of wind pulled at what looked like the remains of a suit too clean, too fancy for a scavenger. And then he saw her face. Even through the rain and mist, he could tell she wasn't human. Her skin was a deep blue color, like the ocean at night, but it was marked with fresh burns where the acid had eaten through. Long black hair stuck to her face, soaked and tangled. Her eyes, large and deep violet, were filled with something between confusion and pain. Those eyes found his and locked on. Zane felt his jaw clench. His hands made fists at his sides. Walk away, he told himself. That's the smart move. Stranded aliens meant trouble. They usually had enemies, and Zane had made enough enemies on his own. He'd survived this long by staying out of things that weren't his business, by keeping his head down and his mouth shut. But she wasn't just injured. She was dying. The acid rain had already begun to eat through her clothes. Her exposed skin was blistering from the exposure, red and raw. Even if she could stand, she wouldn't make it far. The storm would swallow her whole. Zane let out a sharp breath, his fingers twitching at his side. His mind raced, weighing options, calculating risks. You know how this ends, Kane. He flinched at the name. It had been years since anyone had called him that. Kane the butcher. Kane the mercenary. Kane the traitor. He wasn't that man anymore. He'd left that life behind, buried it deep where it couldn't hurt anyone else. But he still remembered. He remembered the last time he'd hesitated, the last time he'd had a choice to make. And he remembered the body he hadn't been fast enough to save. Something in his chest twisted, hot and sharp. The old wound that never quite healed. Damn it, he muttered under his breath. Without another thought, he ripped off his cloak and sprinted toward her. The fabric hissed as it met the rain, already starting to fray at the edges. But it would hold for now. It had to. He threw the cloak over her, shielding her as best he could from the acid that fell like tears from the angry sky. She flinched when he touched her, her violet eyes widening as he crouched beside her up close. She looked even worse. Her breathing was shallow and quick, like a bird's. Her fingers twitched weakly against the ground, trying to push herself up but failing. "Hey," he called, shaking her shoulder gently. "You still with me?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Out. Instead, her body gave a sharp, involuntary shudder. Her eyes started to roll back. Too late. The thought hit him like a punch to the gut, that Zane didn't hesitate. He hooked an arm under her knees and lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her frame too thin, too fragile, like she hadn't eaten in days. "Hold on," he muttered, more to himself than to her. The wind howled around them as he ran. Each step burned as the rain seeped through his sleeves, eating at his skin, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't afford to. His bunker wasn't far just past the ridge, built into the remains of an old cargo bay. If he could just get there before the storm hit full force. A sharp gasp cut through the storm's roar. Zane glanced down. The woman's violet eyes had fluttered open, dazed and unfocused. She stared up at him, her lips parting slightly, as if she wanted to say something. Instead, her fingers weakly clutched at his jacket, gripping the fabric like holding on to him. Was the only thing keeping her tied to the world. Something about that made his chest tighten, made him run faster. He pushed forward, his boots slamming against the wet ground. The bunker came into view through the mist-rusted steel door. Barely visible, but there. Home. Almost there, he said, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. He slammed his shoulder into the door, kicking it open with his boot. The hinges screamed in protest, but it gave way. The sudden silence inside was deafening. The rain, the wind, the howling storm, all of it was cut off the moment the heavy door sealed shut behind them. The difference was like stepping from hell into, well, a different kind of hell, but at least it was dry. Zane staggered forward, his legs shaking from the run. He laid the woman down onto the old cot in the corner, the springs creaking under her weight. For a moment he just stood there, breathing hard. The weight of what he'd just done settled over him like a heavy blanket. What was he thinking? He didn't save people. He wasn't a hero. Heroes got people killed. But she was still alive. Barely, but alive. Her skin was still burning in places. Fresh acid burns standing out like angry red marks against the blue of her arms. He needed to stop the damage, and fast. Moving on instinct, Zane grabbed a canister of medical foam from the shelf. His hands shook as he shook it hard, the contents mixing with a soft rattle. He sprayed it over the worst of the burns, watching as the foam expanded and hissed, sealing over her wounds and stopping the spread of the acid. She winced, her body tensing for a moment, but then she let out a long breath. Her breathing eased, becoming deeper and more steady. Zane sat back on his heels, rubbing a hand down his face. What the hell had he just done? For a long moment he just watched her. She was unconscious again, but up close he could see the delicate features of her face more clearly. There were faint markings along her temples, some kind of tattoo or insignia, swirling patterns that looked almost like writing. A soldier? A noble? A fugitive? More questions. More trouble. She stirred slightly, her dark eyebrows drawing together like she was having a bad dream. Then, to his surprise, her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with effort. "You," she whispered, her voice barely audible, rough like sandpaper. Zane exhaled, leaning back against the wall. He let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Yeah, me. What ... She tried to sit up, but her strength gave out. "Hell if I know," he answered the question she couldn't finish. Her lips twitched slightly, like she wanted to smile but didn't have the energy. Before she could try to speak again, the exhaustion dragged her under. Her eyes slipped shut, and her breathing evened out. Zane watched her for a long moment, then glanced toward the door. The storm still raged outside, but inside, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone, and that changed everything. The calm before. The silence before an attack was always the same. Zane had been in enough fights to know the feeling, that eerie stillness, the way the air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first shot to be fired. Instinct prickled at the back of his neck, an old survival reflex honed from years of knowing when someone was about to make a very bad decision, usually involving him. He sat near the entrance of the bunker, his rifle resting across his lap, fingers drumming a slow rhythm against the metal. The storm outside had finally died down, leaving the world quiet. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that made smart people nervous. Silver stirred on the cot behind him, letting out a soft groan as she shifted position. He glanced over his shoulder. Her violet eyes fluttered open, still hazy with exhaustion, but more focused than before. "Where are we?" she murmured, her voice stronger now. "Safe," Zane answered, though he wasn't entirely sure how long that would last. Nothing stayed safe on Vega 9 for long. Silver exhaled slowly and pushed herself up on her elbows. She still looked weak, her dark hair was tangled from sleep, her blue skin still marked with fading burns from the acid rain. But there was something sharp in her gaze now. Awareness. Calculation. She was assessing the situation, piecing things together. Smart. "You carried me," she said after a moment, her voice quieter now, almost surprised. Zane huffed a dry laugh. "Yeah, well, you weren't exactly walking on your own." She studied him for a long moment, her head tilted slightly. Then she shifted, pulling the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Thank you." Something in her tone made him pause. She said it like she wasn't used to saying those words, like she wasn't used to needing to. He shrugged, turning his attention back to the rifle in his hands. "Don't mention it." The motion sensor near the door flickered from green to red. Zane went completely still. His fingers immediately tightened around the grip of his rifle, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Every muscle in his body screamed danger. He reached for the small monitor on his wrist and tapped the screen. A grainy, distorted feed from the external sensor appeared, showing 3 heat signatures moving steadily toward the bunker. Not scavengers. Not locals. Bounty hunters. Zane let out a slow breath through his nose. He should have known it wouldn't take long for someone to come. Looking. People like Silver didn't just disappear into the wasteland without someone sending guns to find them. "They found us," he muttered, his voice flat. Silver stiffened, her expression shifting instantly to something colder, more guarded. The softness disappeared from her face like it had never been there. "How many?" she asked, already swinging her legs over the side of the cot. 3, maybe more, he said, standing up and moving to the supply shelf. Standard approach. No rush. They think. They've got time. He grabbed extra ammunition, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. Bad news is they're right. Silver stood up, her hands gripping the edge of the cot for balance. Her legs were shaky, but she stayed upright. You should leave me, she sighed, though there was no real hope in her voice. Zane snorted. Yeah, let's pretend that's an option. She gave him a sharp look, her violet eyes flashing. I mean it. If they take me, you walk away. This isn't your fight. Then why are they at my door? Zane shot back. Silver didn't have an answer for that dot outside. The sound of boots on wet ground grew louder. Heavy. Confident. Professional.Zayn pulled the safety off his rifle, pressing his back against the bunker wall. His heart rate stayed steady. This was familiar territory. This was what he knew how to do. Stay low, he told her. If I go down, you run. Got it? Silver's gaze darkened, but she nodded. Then the door exploded inward. Zane barely had time to move before the blast rocked the bunker, sending metal shards and choking dust flying everywhere. The concussion hit him like a hammer, making his ears ring. He dropped low, rolling behind the nearest cover as 3 armored figures stepped through the smoking doorway. They moved like professionals, smooth, coordinated, deadly. The leader was a heavy-set man with a jagged scar running down his neck. His visor glowed red as he scanned the room, his weapon raised and ready. Told you, he muttered to his squad, his voice distorted by the helmet speakers. Tracker led straight to her. The second bounty hunter chuckled, a cold sound that made Zane's skin crawl. He raised his weapon, the barrel glowing with stored energy. And look, someone's been playing hero. His visor turned toward Zane's hiding spot. Real bad luck, friend. Zane didn't answer. He just fired. The pulse round slammed into the second hunter's shoulder, spinning him around and sending him staggering back. Before the others could react, Zane was already moving, rolling to the side and taking another shot. The third bounty hunter dodged just in time, the energy blast missing him by inches. He returned fire immediately, the shot searing past Zane's head so close he felt the heat on his cheek. He ducked behind a metal crate, cursing under his breath. 3 against 1. Fantastic odds. Then, out of nowhere, Silver moved. Zane had expected her to stay down, to wait for an opening or a chance to escape. But instead she was already in motion, moving faster than someone in her condition should have been able to move. She darted behind the nearest hunter while he was focused on Zane, grabbing his arm and twisting it with surprising strength. The bounty hunter let out a grunt of surprise, but before he could react, Silver had yanked his own weapon from his grip and jammed it into his ribs. 1 point-blank shot. The man dropped without another sound. Zane didn't have time to be impressed. The leader had turned towards Silver, raising his weapon to take her down, but Zane was faster. He fired, hitting the man square in the chest. The leader stumbled backward, his armor absorbing most of the impact but not all of it. The distraction was enough. Silver grabbed the last remaining bounty hunter's rifle, flipping it in her hands, with practiced ease before delivering a sharp crack across his helmeted head. He crumpled to the floor and didn't get up. Silence fell over the bunker like a heavy blanket. Zane slowly lowered his rifle, his ears still ringing from the gunfire. Remind me to never underestimate you again. Silver wiped the back of her hand across her face, still breathing hard from the fight. Noted. The 3 bodies lay motionless at their feet, smoke still curling from the edges of the broken doorway. Zane nudged one of the bounty hunters with his boot, his mind already racing ahead to the next problem. This was a retrieval squad, he muttered, recognizing the gear, the approach. They weren't here to kill you. Silver grimaced, rubbing at a mark on her forearm. They wanted proof of death. A body to bring back to whoever's paying them. Which means they're supposed to report in, Zane said, meeting her eyes. And whoever sent them is going to realize they're not coming back real soon. Silver swore, under her breath in a language Zane didn't recognize. He glanced at her, his expression serious. We need to move. Now. Silver met his gaze, and he saw something unreadable flash in her violet eyes. Fear? Determination? Maybe both. Then she nodded. They both knew what this meant. This wasn't over. Not even close. Sanctuary, the fire crackled low. It's flickering. Light casting long, dancing shadows against the damp stone walls of the cave. The storm had finally passed completely, leaving only the distant rumble of thunder and the soft hiss of acid rain evaporating off the jagged rocks outside. The air inside their temporary shelter was thick with the scent of smoke and damp earth. A stark contrast to the cold, metallic bite of the wasteland beyond. It was almost peaceful, if you could ignore the fact that they were being hunted. Zane sat with his back against the rough stone wall, his rifle resting beside him within easy reach. His muscles ached from the fight and the long run to get here. Fresh bruises were forming where he'd slammed against the cave floor during their escape, and the cut on his jaw still throbbed, a sharp reminder that their so-called victory had come at a price. Everything hurt, but he was alive. That was more than a lot of people could say. Across from him, Silver was awake now, propped up on her elbows. Her long black hair fell in tangled waves around her face, and the firelight gave her blue skin. Soft, almost ethereal glow. But Zane could see the exhaustion etched deep into her features. She was still recovering, still worn down from the hell she'd been through before they met. You're staring, she murmured, her voice rough with fatigue. Zane huffed, shifting his gaze back to the fire. Just making sure you're still breathing. Not dead yet, she said, attempting a smirk. But it faded quickly as she winced, pressing a hand against her ribs where one of the bounty hunters had clipped her. Zane watched her for a moment, then reached for the medical kit beside him. He pulled out a small vial of antiseptic and a roll of fresh bandages. Let me see your arm. Silver hesitated, her fingers twitching slightly. There was something almost vulnerable in that hesitation, like she wasn't used to letting people help her. Finally, she reluctantly extended her forearm. The skin beneath the torn sleeve shimmered faintly in the firelight, the blue color deepening to almost purple in the shadows. Zane gently unwrapped the old bandage, frowning as he examined the wound beneath. The medical foam had done its job, sealing the worst of the acid burns and stopping the spread of the damage. But the edges were still raw and irritated, angry red lines against the blue of her skin. His touch was careful as he applied the antiseptic, but even so, Silver sucked in a sharp breath through her teeth. That bad? She muttered. Zane's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. I've seen worse. Silver raised an eyebrow. On yourself or someone else? Zane didn't answer immediately. His hands worked with practiced precision, movements careful and efficient. He'd done this before too many times to count. Both, he said finally. Silver studied him, her expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. You were a soldier. It wasn't a question. Zane let out a slow breath, securing the bandage before leaning back against the stone wall. The fire popped and crackled, filling the silence between them. Against the wall something like that, Silver tilted her head, curiosity flicking in her violet eyes. Let me guess you don't talk about it, Zane smirked. Without humor you catch on quick. Silver didn't press. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It hung between them, filled with things unsaid after armament. She reached out, brushing her fingers lightly over the cut along his jaw. Zane stiffened. You should have let him treat this earlier, she murmured, her touch lingering. Didn't seem important, he muttered. Silver's fingers hesitated again against his skin. You are, she said. Softlizy's breath hitched for a moment. Neither of them moved. The warmth of her touch burned more than the wound itself. It wasn't just the physical contact, it was the way she was. Looking at him like she saw something past the walls he had built. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to smirk. You always get this sentimental one. Someone patches you up. Silver rolled her eyes, but didn't pull away. Shut up for the first time in longer than he could remember. Zane let himself relax just a little. You never answer my question, he said after a beat. Silver arched a brow. Which one? The one about was hunting you? Silver's expression darkened. She slowly withdrew her hand, shifting her gaze. Back to the fire. My people marked me, she said quietly, branded me before I even ran. Zane's jaw clenched. That tracker in your arm, Morathan. A tracker, Silver murmured. She pulled back the sleeve of her shirt, exposing intricate silver lines that ran beneath her skin. It's a biological fail-safe way to ensure I can never truly disappear. Zane frowned, watching the faint glow beneath the surface. So they can always find you. Not exactly. It doesn't transmit constantly, more like a dead man's switch. If I die, they know immediately. If I survive long enough, make sure I don't. Zay swore under his breath. That's insane. Silver let out a dry, humorless laugh. That's the point, Zane exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He had seen plenty of messed up things in his time, but this was something else. You are important to him, he muttered. Silver nodded slowly. I was a researcher. I developed technology, weaponized things that should never have been weaponized when I realized what they were. Using my work for I tried to destroy it. But they were faster. They made sure I could never be more than a liability. She swallowed hard. And no, I'm a loose, and they need to tie up. Zay's grip tightened around his knee. Do you regret it? Silver blinked. Turning to him, running, he clarified. Do you wish he'd stayed for a long moment? She didn't answer. Then finally she shook her head. No, she whispered. I'd rather die free than live under their control. Zane watched her, something unreadable in his expression. She looked back at him, and suddenly she wasn't just some runaway scientist, wasn't just another person trying to survive in the wasteland. She was like him. Someone who had walked away from something they could never truly escape. A long silence stretched between them. The fire crackled softly, the only sound in the cavern. Then, before he could second-guess himself, Zane said, if we find a way to remove that. Mark, what happens next? Silver blinked. What do you mean? I mean, Zay exhaled, if we actually manage to get that thing off you. No more tracking, no more failsafe. Where do you go? Silver stared at him as if the thought had never occurred to her. I don't know, she admitted. Zane studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms. Well, guess we'll figure it out. Silver gave him a long look. Zane smirked. Yeah. Princess, we for the first time that night. Silver smiled, not a smirk, not a mask, but something real. And for the first time in years, Zane realized he might actually mean it. The fire had burned low, its embers casting a dull glow against the cold stone walls of the cave outside. The world had settled into a deceptive calm. The storm had passed, but its aftermath remained, the distantness of acid rain eating away at the jagged rock formations, the charred remnants of the land left broken and scarred. Zane sat against the cavern wall, absently running a cloth over the blade of his knife. The rhythmic motion kept his hands busy, but his mind was elsewhere. He should have been focused on my next move, on the fact that they had just killed a retrieval team, on the fact that more would come, and soon. Instead, his attention kept drifting to her. Silver sat on the other side of the fire, her long black hair falling messily over one shoulder as she inspected the weapon she had taken from one of the Bounty hunters, she had stripped it apart fingers, moving with the kind of precision that told him this wasn't the first time she had handled a rifle like this. She was still recovering, still exhausted from the fight, but she was awake, alert, stronger than she had been, and Zane couldn't stop watching her. She must have sensed it, because she smirked without looking up. If you have something to say, just say it. Zane huffed a quiet laugh, setting his knife aside. Just wondering where you learned to handle rifle like that. Thought you were a scientist. I am, Silver said, sliding a piece of the weapon back into place. That even scientists need to know how to defend themselves. She glanced at him, something unreadable in her expression. Especially my line of work. Zane studied her, noting the way her fingers moved with certainty, the way her violet eye stayed sharp, despite the exhaustion weighing on her. You ever kill anyone before today? Silver's hands still for just a fraction of a second. It was so quick, so subtle, that most people wouldn't have noticed, but Zane did. She exhaled, softly setting the weapon down beside her. Not like that, she admits. Zane leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. You regret it? Silver didn't answer. Right away she stared into the fire, her fingers brushing absently over the silver markings on her forearm. The brand that had condemned her to a life of running. Finally, she said no. But I didn't know if that made me a better person, or a worse one. Zane considered that he had asked himself the same question too many times to count. He still didn't have an answer. Does it matter? He said. Finally, Silver arched eyebrow. Does it matter? Regret or no regret, it doesn't change what happened. Zane said, doesn't bring them back, doesn't erase what's already done. Silver tilted her head slightly, studying him. You sound like you've had practice convincing yourself of that. Zane smirked. With Alfuma, maybe. A long silence stretched between them. It wasn't uncomfortable beauty, it was heavy, the kind of silence that carried weight, meaning. Then Silver did something unexpected. She reached out, brushing her fingers lightly along the edge of the cut on his jaw. Zane stilled. The touch was brief, barely there, but it sent a sharp jolt through him, something hot and electric. You should have let me treat this earlier, Silver murmured. Didn't seem important. Zane muttered, his voice louder than before. Silver's fingers lingered a moment longer before she let them drop. You're bad at letting people take care of you. Zane huffed a quiet laugh. I don't need taken care of. Silver smirked. Sure, keep telling yourself that. For a moment neither of them moved. Their fire flickered between them, casting shifting shadows across their faces. Then Silver spoke again, quieter this time. You never told me why you stayed. Zane's smirk faded slightly. What, back at Thebunker? She said, watching him closely. You could have walked away. Hell, you should have, but you didn't. Zane exhaled through his nose, leaning back against the wall. Considered lying, telling her something easy, something that wouldn't dig too deep. But something about the way she was looking at him made him tell the truth, because I've been where you are, he said finally. I know what it's like to have the entire damn universe telling you that you don't get to decide your own fate, and I know what it's like to wish someone gave a damn. Silver stared at him, something shifting in her expression. Then, to his surprise, she smiled, not the smirk she usually wore, not the sharp, teasing grin she used as a defense mechanism, a real, genuine smile. Well, she murmured, I guess I got lucky. Zane swallowed, his throat suddenly dry before he could respond, before he could even process the warmth curling in his chest. Silver leaned in. It wasn't rushed, wasn't hesitant, just inevitable. Her lips brushed against his, soft and warm. Anzi's entire body tensed. Then instinct took over. He kissed her back. The shift was immediate, like something that had been building between them had finally snapped. Silver's fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer. Zane responded in kind, one hand slipping to her waist, the other threading through her hair. She was warm, solid, reeling for the first time in years. Zane let himself forget everything else. He didn't think about the bounty on her head, didn't think about the people hunting them, didn't think about the fact that he was making a mistake, because it didn't feel like one. All that mattered was her. Silver pulled back slightly, her breath warm against his lips. Her violet eyes searched his, something flickering in fair depths, something unspoken but understood. You really are bad at being alone, she murmured. Zane smirked, running his thumb lightly along her jaw. And you're really bad at making good decisions, Silver grinned. Yeah. Then she kissed him again, and for the first time in a long, long time. Zane didn't give a damn what happened next. The wasteland was silent, too silent. Zane knew what that meant. He had been in enough battles to recognize the weight of an ambush, for it happened. The air was too still for distant echoes of the storm. Already swallowed by something heavier, anticipation, they were being watched. His fingers twitched toward the rifle slung over his shoulder as he scanned the terrain. Jagged metal ruins stretched across the barren land, twisted remnants of a world long abandoned. The sky overhead was a dull, sickly green, the last remnants of the storm fading into the horizon. Then he saw it, a glint of movement in the distance. Not much, just enough to confirm what he already knew. They found us, he muttered. Silver crouched beside him against the rock formation, barely tensed. How many? Too many. Her violet eyes narrowed as she peered into the distance. Zane followed her gaze and spotted them, a formation of black armored soldiers, moving in precise lines, their rifles drawn and ready. No scavengers this time, no bounty hunters. These were enforcers. Silver's people had finally come for her. Zane exhaled sharply, gripping his rifle tighter. They sent a damn squad. Silver swallowed hard. They won't stop until I'm dead. Zane glanced at her, his jaw tightening. Then let's make sure they don't get the chance. A distant worrying sound sent a chill down his spine. His eyes snapped to the sky. Drones, sleek black machines, hovered above the battlefield, scanning the area with sharp, mechanical precision. Their red lights flickered in unison, locking onto them. Zay growled, "They've got surveillance." Silver was already moving. She reached in her satchel, pulling out a small disc-shaped "This, give me cover, I can jam them." Zane didn't hesitate. He fired first. The first shot hit one the soldier's square in the chest. His armor absorbed the brunt of it, but the impact still sent him stumbling backward. The squad reacted, instantly raising their weapons and returning fire. Energy blasts screamed through the air, slamming into the rocks around them. Zane ducked, rolling behind cover as molten shards of stone rained down. His ears rang from the concussive force, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. Silver, hunched over the device, worked quickly. The drones overhead beat sharply, their lights intensifying as they locked on her signal. Almost there, she muttered. Zay cursed under his breath, popping up just long enough to fire off another round out. This time he aimed for one of the drones, catching it in its sensor. It exploded mid-air, sending shrapnel spiraling toward the ground. But there were more. The soldiers pushed forward, flanking them from both sides. Some of them launched a grenade. Zane barely had time to react before he grabbed Silver and pulled her down, shielding as the explosion ripped through the rock wall behind them. They hit the ground, hard dust and debris filling the air. Silver coughed, but her hands never stopped moving. Just a little sharp, piercing noise filled the battlefield the moment Silver activated the jammer. The drones flickered erratically, their lights failing one by one. Sparks erupted from their engines as they spiraled out of control, crashing into the ruins below. Zane didn't waste the opportunity. He swung his rifle back up and charged. The first soldier that got too close found himself on the receiving end of Zane's elbow impact, knocking his helmet sideways before he could recover. Zane slammed the butt of his rifle into the man's visor, cracking the glass before firing point blank into his chest. The body dropped. Others kept coming. One tackled Zane from behind, slamming him into the ground. Zane grunted, rolling with the momentum before twisting, locking his arm around the soldier's throat. The man struggled, but Zane was faster, stronger. With a sharp, brutal movement, he snapped his neck. The lifeless body slumped against dirt. He turned just in time to see Silver fighting off two of them at once. She wasn't as strong, wasn't as trained, but she was smart. She used her smaller size to her advantage, dodging and weaving between their strikes. One of them grabbed her wrist, but she twisted, driving a hidden blade into the gap between his armor plates. The man screamed, dropping to his knees. The second soldier raised his rifle. Zane fired first. The last shot echoed across the battlefield. Then silence. Zane was breathing Hard, his muscles burning from the fight, blood dripped from his knuckles. Some of it, not Silver, exhaled, held shakily, wiping sweat from her brow. Is that a sudden beep? From her arm, cut her off. Zay's stomach dropped the mark. It was glowing. Pulsing, Silver's eyes widened. They're activating it again. Zane moved fast. He grabbed her wrist, examining the mark. It was spreading, the silver veins glowing brighter, seeping up her arm like it was infecting her body. She gasped, her breath itching. I can't. Zane knew what was happening. They weren't just tracking her. They were overriding her. Fight it, he ordered. Silver shook, her muscles locking as if an unseen force was controlling her. Her violet eyes flashed with pain. Panic, fear. I can't. Zay gritted his teeth. He had seconds before they took her from him. Yes, you can, he growled, gripping her face. Listen me, Silver, you're stronger than them. They don't own you. Her breath shuddered. Zane, look at me, he demanded. You're not theirs, you never were. Her fingers clenched into a shirt. She was fighting it, struggling against whatever signal was trying to steal control. Finch gasped. The mark flickered, and then it died. Silver collapsed forward, barely catching herself against his chest. She was shaking, her entire body trembling from the exertion. Zay held her close, his grip steady, grounding. You did it. Hemimmured. Sil's breath was warm against his neck. I thought I was gonna. Zane closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. He had almost lost her, really. Lost her, and that terrified him more than anything. Not on my watch, he muttered. Silver pulled back slightly, her violet eyes searching his. There was something raw in her gaze. Something unspoken, something real. Zan didn't know who moved first, but suddenly his lips were on hers. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't desperate. It was relief, a silent, promiscuous declaration without words. Silver melted into him, her fingers twisting into his jacket, holding on like he was the only thing keeping her anchored. And maybe in that moment he was. When they finally pulled away, their foreheads rested together, their breaths mingling. Zay smirked just slightly. So what now? Silver let out a small, breathless laugh. We run. Zay grinned. Then let's get moving with the rising sun. At their backs, they didn't look back. They had one, and they were free. The sky above Vega and Nine had never looked so open for the first time in what felt like forever. There was no one chasing them, no mercenaries, no soldiers, no drones hovering overhead, tracking Silver's every movement, just the endless quiet expanse of the wastelands, stretching before them, bathed in the golden glow of the rising sun. Zane stood near the remains of the battlefield, the distant smoke from the fight already starting to fade into the horizon. His body arced, bruises forming where fists, gunstocks, and shrapnel had made their mark, but none of that mattered, because they had one. He turned to look at Silvao, stood a few feet away, gazing down at her arm. The tracking mark that had controlled her, haunted her, nearly killed her, was finally gone. She flexed her fingers experimentally, as if expecting it to react, to glow, to pulse beneath her skin. But didn't. It was just skin. Now it's really over, she murmured half to herself. Zane smirked, stepping closer. Took you long enough to believe it. Silver turned to him, and for the first time since he had met her, there was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation, just something lighter, freer, something that made his tighten in a way he wasn't ready to think too hard about. I thought I'd feel different, she admitted, like there'd still be some part of it left, some part of me still trapped. She exhaled, but just gone. Zay studied her for a long moment. So what now? Silver smiled, a real, genuine smile. I was hoping you'd have an answer for that. Zane huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. I never planned that far ahead. Silver stepped closer. The wind stirred her long black hair, the morning light casting a faint glow against her deep blue skin. She was tired, they both were, but beneath the exhaustion she looked at peace. It was a good look on her. You could leave, you know, she said after a moment, her voice softer. Now you're not tied to this, to me. Xana arched a brow. You trying to get rid of me? Princess Silver smirked. No, just giving you out. Zane crossed his arms, tilting his head slightly. Well, that's stupid. Scylla blinked what Zane took another step forward, closing the space between them. I didn't go through all this trouble just to walk away now. Silver searched his face as if trying to figure out whether he was joking. He wasn't. A slow, knowing smile curled at the edge of her lips. "You're terrible at making smart decisions," Zay grinned. "Yeah." Well, so are you. A beat of silence, then before he could talk himself out of it, he reached up, cupping the side of her face. Silver inhaled sharply at the touch, but shouldn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into it. Zay kissed her slow and deliberate, not out of desperation, not out of fear, but because, for the first time in years, he wanted something more than just survival, and for the first time in years he wasn't alone. When they finally pulled away, Silver let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. "You really are terrible at being alone, aren't you?" Zane's smirk had just not the wind, carried the distant hum of the wasteland beyond, but it didn't feel empty anymore, not like it used to. They had survived, they had won, and this time they were free to choose what came next. Silver laced her fingers through his lettern. "Get out of here." Zane squeezed her hand. "Yeah, let's go." And together they walked toward the rising sun.